Hello everyone, Pineaaronapple here, and yes, we are back with Doctor Who Series 14, because no way am I calling this Season 1. We have a Season 1 and we have a Series 1, we do not need another. So today we are looking at the 2-episode premiere of Series 14, our proper look at the 15th Doctor played by Ncuti Gatwa, and our new companion with the shifty, mysterious backstory that the overarching narrative of is blindingly prevalent in these episodes. Because while there is a lot new here, there are some moments of Russell using old tricks. But the way these episodes and the arc narrative tie into the 60th specials is nice to see. But it is a little disappointing we seem to have another Bad Wolf, let's mention it all the time story. It would have been nice to have a little more subtlety, but hey, playing one of the main villains is Jinx Monsoon, so really it's my own stupid fault that I expected subtlety, but in their case it's warranted for the character.
Daddy was so bad to me.
So let's take a look at these episodes and spitball some theories as to who the mysterious one who waits is. And boys, since they're mentioning the giggle, there is no lack of options. So let's get into episode 1, the season opener, even if for some reason Disney Plus says The Church on Ruby Road is both Special 4 and episode 1. But anyway, let's get into episode 1, Space Babies by Russell T Davies. So we start the episode with the same title sequence as the specials, but with some minute differences. No dramatic zoom in as the TARDIS whizzes across a different yet beautiful section of space, and different effects on the diamond logo. We pick back up with a little rerun of the last part of Church on Ruby Road, but with no Mrs. Flood, and the Doctor invites Ruby inside. She does the whole asking things quite well, and the Doctor comes up with some different answers to the more generic questions. And considering he actually answers them, unlike 13, who avoided explaining as much as she could to her friends, we can see the creativity in the dialogue, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. 15 mentions the Rani, meaning she is totally coming back, I swear guys, and says conquistador really strangely.
The Rani, the Conquistador.
15 is pretty open about everything from his name to the chameleon circuit and to Gallifrey's redestruction. Ugh. But this scene works pretty well. It's the next scene where we're introduced to the fun and more light-hearted tone, the scene after the Doctor talks about his people's genocide. And while I appreciate the comedy working well with the bouncy score and the lead performers, not all of it lands, meaning that when it doesn't land, it really doesn't land. Ruby is a little out of her depth, but eventually works up the courage to go outside into the past, giving us this great view. And this is a real harbinger of the great visuals to come. Ruby steps on a butterfly and in doing so changes into a different species that threatens to kill the Doctor. And while I love the look and the joke is edited differently to its preview that felt a bit stilted, it does feel a little shoehorned. But I'm sure there is an audience who it'll land for, just not me. The kinda plot holiness of the joke is fixed with a nice comedic offhand line, and with some help from Ruby they enthusiastically go through the vortex into the future. And while I love the new style of materialization, the fading in's still there, but showing the velocity and speed the TARDIS comes in with. I think I prefer previous shots of within the vortex to these. I like the colours here, a new unique colour scheme. As the first Russell era had the blue and red green, the Moffat era was reluctant to show the vortex within the episodes, and the Whittaker one, while not shown often, was a visual spectacle. This is kinda disappointing, as the TARDIS just skims along the bottom like a stone thrown against the water, or a depressed skateboard going up and down the sides of a bowl. They arrive on a space station, and with a strange confirmation of the reality of Star Trek, they investigate as the station is clearly falling apart, with some nice synergy.
No, you made it worse.
And they are creeped upon by the Boogeyman. And considering this monster is meant to be super duper scary, literally inducing fear in those that hear its roar, it's a little silly. They used creative camera angles and shots to obscure the creature, and make it more unknown until the latter portion of the episode, which really helps add fear factor, but with its spindly little fingers and slightly clumsy walk and dog bark at the end, it comes across more like a low-budget, straight-to-VHS 80s horror movie monster, just without Red Letter Media laughing at it.
What are you even laughing at? The background?
No, the things that are wrong with her.
What?
All the things wrong with her. The crying moment.
good lines, they're sent running, as we get some strange but effective shots from the CCTV, and while the editing is a little epileptic, it does enhance the visual storytelling. They hop in a little elevator up to safety as the Doctor analyses his own fear response, and he keeps saying,
Yet again, push the button.
in this episode, so I think I'm missing some sort of gag. They find a baby farm, also called a Genesis machine, made to, of course, grow babies for world colonization.
What? Food? They're not tomatoes.
Oh, excuse me, there's a big hungry thing downstairs.
15 pulls an end of the world and shows Ruby her first vista of open space. And to be fair, it looks pretty good. I'd be as impressed as Ruby. It's now she realises he is alone, and he introduces her to his way of life with a decent speech. Also pulling from End of the World, going so far as to explain the whole phoning other times thing, and explaining the translation circuit with some nice dialogue. And while I will compare this to exactly the same way these things were introduced in the End of the World back in Series 1, this is supposed to be accessible for newer audiences, and some new things are done with it, like giving us a visual aid for the translation, even with another mention of Mavity. Ruby calls Carla a little after she left in the church on Ruby Road, and the two adventurers are beset upon by a baby controlling a motorised pram. And while not every shot of these babies lands, it's a pretty good effect, at least comparing to big babies.
You're a couple of guys hanging out by the flowers. Don't say you just got there, you've been there for hours.
But seriously, it works quite well, and both the performances and dialogue seem to hit the mix between baby and higher intelligence quite well. The first baby they meet is one of the main two, Sammy Amber and Mason McCumsky as Eric, who, while attempting to analyse the building pressure of the station, comes across our travellers, confusing them for their mummy and daddy. He excitedly leads them back to the other intelligent babies, who the Doctor calls babies, but keeps correcting himself to space babies, which I find kind of strange. Like he's correcting someone for getting the name of the episode wrong. So, episode 1, it's called Babies? No.
Space babies!
The set is nice, both in the halls, with colourful drawings on the walls at baby height, and with creative devices in the main hub to help the babies use the controls of the station. It's here we meet the captain baby, Poppy, played by Shola Olaitan Ajiboye, and Sienna Robin Mavanga Phipps. Wow, those are two very long names. The whole scene of the babies explaining their jobs and the Doctor and Ruby reacting are all quite whimsical, even when they have to unfortunately tell them they aren't their mummy and daddy. Ruby entertains most of the babies, who have never had hugs before, which feels like a hate crime. And we get info as the Doctor analyses the systems, as the adults left, and he gets to flex his emotional chops this episode. Even when the writing doesn't land, but that comes later, as now he tells the Timeless Child backstory to Poppy, setting up the moral of this episode. Everyone is unique, we're all different, but that's where we find our strength. A pretty good message, unless you're a raving cannibal. As I'll say later on, I had issues with this message interweaving into the plot, as I don't think it was integrated quite well. We get introduced to the supposed automatic AI, Nan-E, like Wall-E, who looks after the kids, including synchronised nose-blowing. And we get to know the monster from the baby's point of view, the Boogeyman, which Ruby discredits, leading the Doctor to traumatise and laugh at the babies. The Doctor is personally called away by Nanny, who isn't all that she seems, and wants him to go to a certain area.
Access portal 357.
Yes, it is just a storage unit. What would I need to go there for?
Oh, for God's sakes! 357, come on!
Him and Ruby go there, and they have a little moment, drawing connections between the babies and Ruby's story, leading to some sort of psychic phenomena, including summoning the snow from the church, and giving the Doctor a different vision of what happened there, where Ruby's mum turns and points at the Doctor, once again supposedly sliding into the season arc. They're brought from their moment by Nanny, who turns out to be a member of the crew, Jocelyn, played by Golda Rochevelle, who's been looking after the babies, and we see videos of the other members of staff leaving, but disagreeing with having to leave. A decision made by the company to save money, but legally not being allowed to stop the station's baby machine. Things are going wrong, so the Doctor plugs in his sonic screwdriver, to recalibrate the main systems. Jocelyn gives a pretty good performance, hiding away from the babies, scared of being too close, and either dying before the babies, or truly being left on her own when they die, but resigning herself to death for them, as they will eventually run out of resources, stuck in space, with the neighbouring refugee planet only taking people in, not going out to fetch them. Jocelyn doesn't know what the boogeyman is either, not answering any of the Doctor's questions. But Ruby does have a theory that everything in the station fits together. Babies, a nanny, mummy and daddy, and a boogeyman. And of course, the hero to slay the monster, as Eric is now riding into battle, Jocelyn unable to corral him back. And the nanny filter is not used very well for comedic effect here, but it is used better later in the story. Ruby feels like it's her fault having told Eric the monster wasn't real, but the fear effect has stopped Eric in his tracks, sending Ruby and then the Doctor running after him, only to find an overturned pram. To save Eric, Ruby makes noise to draw the boogeyman to them, turning out to not be so much of a good plan as the Doctor sniffs out the fear of Eric, finding him in a cupboard, and having to hide from the boogeyman altogether. And this chase is probably where the editing of the monster is best used, as they try to calm Eric down and we get quick cuts and flashes of the hunting creature. They're almost found, but the other babies come in clutch using a makeshift flamethrower to scare the creature off, with a pretty good triumphant score. Eric returns to base with the other babies, something Ruby refuses to do, and they go the other way, straight to the lower computer interface. To Jocelyn and the babies, the boogeyman has been there as long as the babies have been alive, and the computer system is its base, slime and mucus everywhere, including in Ruby's hair, which is gross. And once we learn what it is, a pretty clever idea all things considered, the monster being made up of mucus from the babies, the computer being on the fritz, interpreting the idea of boogeymen coming after children as literal, growing and birthing the creature from the baby's waist. And I admit having the blowing of the noses earlier in the story for the reveal was pretty clever, but it's still gross to see Ruby showered in it. We also learn the fear is deliberate, it's raw, made to incite primal fear. We get a pretty useless and not as funny as it thinks it is scene where the Doctor has to tell Ruby the slime in her hair is snot, not helped by sloppy chunks coming from the pipe for effect. The creature finds them, and Jocelyn finally has control of the systems, guiding them through the lower levels and eventually closing the boogeyman off in an airlock, as she's ready to suck it out into space to protect herself and, more importantly, the babies. Ruby and the Doctor are treating it as if it were just another baby, which could have been a good idea if the monster was just misunderstood and misinterpreted, but we get none of that, and there's no humanization of the monster, as the closest we got to interacting with it was a baby setting it on fire. So while I am in tune with the Doctor's emotions and Jocelyn's, as Ruby comforts her later, it just isn't a well done payoff to the story. But we do get a good action set piece, as the Doctor has to jump into the airlock, as he doesn't have the sonic, manually hitting the door controls to save the creature. And for some reason, the babies are on the boogeyman's side now? With no explanation, I guess they were told the moral of the story. The story ends all happy as Jocelyn comes out to care for the babies face to face, over her fear, and the boogeyman is down below, still trapped in the airlock, making a dog howl. What a load of crap. And using the built-up chemicals from the baby waste, we get a clever fart and expletive joke, sending the ship towards the refugee planet. The story ends with a nice scene between the Doctor and Ruby, she accepting his offer to travel full-time and getting a TARDIS key. And the scene between the two is pretty great. But the Doctor gives Ruby one single stipulation. He won't go back to the church. The possibility of the paradox of changing that event scaring him enough to refuse her. But he will take her back to her real mother, Carla, dropping the TARDIS into her kitchen, ruining the house once again. But the way they get there and the moral is beautiful from Ruby's point of view. The Doctor comes out to have Christmas with them, but inside the TARDIS we're given a cliffhanger as he analyses Ruby's DNA, and it starts snowing in the console room. So that was episode 1, Space Babies, and there was a lot good with it, but I did find myself a little underwhelmed considering the hype I had. The episode had a great but poorly executed moral, the boogeyman working well as the villain, but the connection of it being just like another one of the children was terrible. I get where they were going, and it might have worked, but the execution here left a lot to be desired. The acting otherwise was pretty good, Ruby and the Doctor both endearing, and even when the writing is a little off or the story arc is a little clearly forced, their performances really draw you into it, and the way the story used them to reintroduce a lot of plot elements for newer audiences, while obvious for long-time fans, were effective, and had bits of new creativity within them. Babies were a wacky concept, realised brilliantly. Sure, the CGI was a little uncanny valley, but to me it wasn't too distracting, and the way they can flip between intelligence and baby instinct was well done. And while not taking part in the final set piece much, they do get enough to do to feel like a real part of the story. Jocelyn was pretty much the same, performed and written well for the most part, and getting a good ending for the character. But the climax does confuse her a little, as I was really connected to her, while the story at large was telling me she was doing the wrong thing. So with the confused message, comedy that failed to land a fair amount of the time, unexplored and underdefined resolution, but with nice acting and enjoyable visuals, I'll give Space Babies by Russell T Davies a 6 out of 10. Not bad, but I feel we could do a lot better, suffering from a lot of the same problems the Star Beast had, but learning from those mistakes, if just a little bit, although unfortunately not having the nostalgia and star power to reach a higher rating. Next is another by Russell T Davies, as is like 75% of the season, but I enjoyed this episode a lot more than Space Babies. But that doesn't make it perfect. In 1925, Jeremy Lim plays musician Timothy Drake. Wow, I wonder if this episode also has a Bruce Wayne or a Dick Grayson. He's teaching Henry here the joys of piano, even making it an entertaining lesson attempting to appeal to the boy's morbid curiosity. He is informative on topics such as the titular Devil's Chord, and is clearly a very good piano player. But as the piano's top slams closed, he is beckoned towards it by a knocking, and opening it, he lets free Jinx Monsoon's long-awaited musical villain, Maestro. Most of the practical and digital effects for Maestro themselves is pretty well done, and the performance from the low-key to the bombastic is pretty great. But it can't all be good, as there are some small times when Maestro grates on me, taking a joke or a bit too far, or when they do this voice. But overall, having them as like a mini toy maker, but for music, is a fantastic idea, and their screen presence is fantastic. Maestro mugs identifying as music, and considering the character is an extra-dimensional being, I'm pretty sure identifying as non-binary should make sense to at least the rational people, and it's handled much better than the gender conversation in the Star Beast, which was written like Russell turned into a vapid 18-year-old influencer.
Get away from him. Them.
What?
Me.
What?
I'm them.
You're who?
You're who?
You're assuming he as a pronoun.
2 magic words.
That sucks.
Henry is identified as Maestro's son, Henry Arbinger, or H. Arbinger, that Maestro promptly disappears. Maestro gets on with the evil doing, accompanied by a great score, and they rip the music from Timothy's soul, eating it, and leading us into the intro with a creative piano bit that slowly fades into the usual tune. These evil music note effects work well most of the time, but do have moments where they look unnatural and not in the good way. After the opening, we appear back in the TARDIS, where Ruby asks to see the Beatles' first album recorded, that for some reason the Doctor seems unimpressed by initially, and then gets super excited, and we head back to one of the only years Doctor Who knows, 1963.
1963.
So in a nice transition, 15 and Ruby change to fit the period, and if you look closely later on, this includes a change of sonic colour. From blue to, without looking for a close-up, seems to be a bronzish red. We'll have to keep an eye out for that later in the series, but it's fun to have multiple colours crop up. They arrive at the album cover part of Abbey Road, you know the one, and their outfits are pretty cool. But there's no way, I believe, even in the 60s, that they can stand in the middle of the road for that long without getting worried. They go into Abbey Road Studios, not yet named that, and hijack a trolley lady's job with some impressive bullshitting from Ruby. So they go from studio to studio, and them along with me are very disappointed by the music being played, as everything seems droll without passion or creativity. They check in with the Beatles, who someone like me that there's nothing but their songs finds accurate in the casting and well used in the story. They meet Cilla Black, who seems just as droll as the others, and the same happens with an ensemble. It's sort of depressing and really bends 15 out of shape. They're quite sad that the Beatles have gone dull, and unfortunately they aren't far enough along to blame it on Yoko Ono. They are given their tea for apparent exorbitant prices, and hold on a moment, is that Susan Twist again? Seriously, this woman's been cropping up pretty consistently. Miss Mary June Wild Blue Yonder, the Galditi lady in the church on Ruby Road.
Can you do Galditi?
And apparently one of the leaving crew members in the last episode. Probably another series arc, but with much more subtlety and surprise than Ruby's. Quite well implemented. And I can't wait to see where it goes for the finale. Perhaps she is splintered back through time like Clara, or is some sort of immortal, who knows. We get a mention of Aeolian tones, and are shown that the past is changing due to the lack of music. So Ruby talks with John while the Doctor speaks with Paul, both played respectively by Chris Mason and George Capel. The Doctor figures out that a while ago music started getting old, and it's more of a job to scrape by now. And we get this beautiful dialogue where Paul speaks about how beautiful music could be. And John is much the same, but Paul gets to foreshadow how to defeat Maestro later on. And as he finally gets a decent emotive tune out, we see Maestro mugging in all the reflections. Like I was saying, the silliness getting a little bit too far. Paul and John are angered and disgusted, so leave, probably under Maestro's influence. And to test what's going on, with some nice dialogue between 15 and Ruby, they have a piano installed on the roof, and the Doctor gives us a rundown of the beginning of an unearthly child. You know, with Susan, the one who waited for him to come back, like Susan Twist, like a future character apparently being called Susan Triad. Jesus, there are a lot of theories going on about this season. A quick maid of the Doctor delivers the piano, and 15 gets Ruby to play. A nice through line considering we watched her play in the church on Ruby Road. And we get to hear a great piece that Ruby apparently came up with when her friend Trudy got heartbroken. Trudy is an interesting character considering she appeared in 2 scenes. Every Twitter arse that I could find immediately bashed the episode for having a trans person just based on her looks, and I found that immediate response hilarious for a character with like 3 lines, so I said we should give her a Big Finish spin-off. But I think it would be interesting if we get to see more of Ruby's friends. Maybe letting them get caught up in an adventure or something. Ruby's beautiful song is nice enough for the episode to have a break and give us a listen, and it clearly inspires many extras around, including the lovely June Hudson, who was previously predominantly Romana's costumer, and has had a Universe role before. And the scene apart from this great cameo is pretty emotional as these people are finally gifted decent music to emote to. But the scene is stopped as Maestro knocks the piano from the inside, ruining the voyeur's days. As Maestro comes out, they laugh like the Toymakers giggle, which is a good idea, but then they literally play the laugh clip from the giggle, which felt a bit lazy. I feel the point could have come across with Jinx's best impression of the original laugh. The Doctor is pretty fucking worried about the implications the giggle has, hiding underground with Ruby as he tries to figure out a game plan. And Maestro pretty intimidatingly struts around looking for them, wanting to eat the songs from Ruby, the only person alive able to play. The Doctor eventually uses a clever setting on his sonic to deafen the nearby area, and this whole scene is basically silent, which is a pretty cool creative choice, as TV shows usually only do this for dramatic effect when someone is deafened or suffers a head injury. But by resonating a puddle with their magic tuning fork, sound is brought back by Maestro. They're ready to get back to it, but June starts playing, inspired by Ruby, and Maestro seems to be pissed off. Not that someone is keeping music from them, but that the music exists, which doesn't really fit the motives of the character that we've just learnt, or that we will learn later on. The scene starts wonderful, as June is clearly having fun, but is unfortunate as Maestro mugs her to death. Ruby is freaking out, but so is the Doctor, worried at the sheer power of one of the Toymaker's kind. An embodiment, And looking at what it took to beat Neil Patrick Harris, his worries are justified. The Doctor makes sure we know this is the payoff to the Legion's line from the giggle, and Ruby is sure that since she's from the future, they can beat Maestro. So they hop back to the present day to see what the future holds. And Ruby says her present time is June, so like 6 months after last episode. That's a lot of Big Finish and comic adventures to write about. So they pull the temptation of Sarah Jane Smith, and the world outside is ruined, pushed into nuclear winter by the lack of music. Ruby and the Doctor have a nice emotional moment, but are interrupted by Maestro, who changes the world around them, and they do introductions. It's now we get the reveal of who Maestro is. Child of the Celestial Toymaker. Wow, their family tree is getting pretty well fleshed out. The Toymaker, their sister Hecuba, the child Maestro, and the grandchild Harbinger. Maestro is a little pissed, but admits it was the absence of the Toymaker that is allowing them to go crazy now. Maestro is revealed to be, to music, what their father was to games, and their dream is to feed on all the unsung songs and revel in the Aeolian music of the dead earth, eventually getting strong enough to devour the Musica Universalis. So, is becoming a pretty big threat. Due to the rules these beings work off of, Maestro has to give away the game. There is a lost chord that summons and banishes them, meaning only a musical genius can find it. With a very imposing attack, Maestro plays what sounds like a rearrangement of a few themes to resonate with the TARDIS, throwing it into a mess, leaving the only thing the Doctor can do to go back to Abbey Road. This episode starts to use some Dutch angles, learning from Thor's mistakes, as they only exist here to enhance the experience, not make you ill, and the Doctor needs to find the notes, so steals John's guitar, while Maestro steals Ruby, as the note effects look a little dodgy, so with a clever quip from the Doctor, he breaks out and follows, only to find Ruby captured. I like the way Maestro's musical bars end as if they have little hands, and Maestro disarms the Doctor. Maestro mentions Trudy, strangely,
Playing lovesick songs for heartbroken lesbians.
and sets to work extracting Ruby's song. But after a song that is apparently a cover, get it? Cover? Like a music cover? All they get is Carol of the Bells from Church on Ruby Road, freaking Maestro the fuck out, giving us the information that the one that waits, teased before, must have been involved. So now it's theorizing time. The one who waits is apparently a he, also known as the oldest one, and seems to be a massively powerful entity. So let's list a few options off. Fenric, he waits a pretty long time before every battle. The Trickster, very much on the level of the Toymaker, perhaps more powerful, as an agent of chaos with his own extra-dimensional brigade. Sutek waited a bloody long time and is massively powerful. Omega waited a long time, but is probably not on the table. Susan and the Pons waited a bloody long time for things, but that's probably not helpful. And then we've got Susan Twist popping up everywhere. Then again, Rob Ritchie mentioned the Chris Waits poster from this episode. That's a possibility. And we've got Mrs. Flood. What is it with mysterious older women in this era? Or Heisenberg is the one that knocks. Maybe they're related to the one who waits. Okay, maybe we can stop this and get back to the episode. Clearly this theorizing isn't getting us very far. Ruby gets dropped, but the Doctor has a plan to use the apparently famed piano in their presence to find the right chords to send Maestro back. This starts a music fight between the two. And while I appreciate the fantastic playing and the strange, possibly reversed shot, but considering this is as close as we have to a Doctor Who musical episode, I would have liked if some noticeable Doctor Who themes were interwoven into the tracks. But as it is still pretty great, I think it was just a smidge of a wasted opportunity, not a real critique. It becomes the Doctor and Ruby versus Maestro, but Maestro blinks first, allowing the Doctor to start sealing them away in a great and tense scene. But he loses the final note, allowing Maestro to blow the piano out of the room and absolutely smack the Doctor and Ruby around until they're locked inside instruments pretty horrifically. And meanwhile, very slowly while all that mess is going on, John and Paul find their love of music together, figuring out the last note together, looking at each other as if 100 different fanfiction authors wrote gay romance novels about the two. And they seal Maestro away, in the goofiest way possible as the piano draws them back in by itself, with one final warning about the one who waits. And to end the episode, we get a goofy musical number. There's always a twist at the end. While it's a good one, with a lot of great aspects, I wasn't as invested as I wanted to be. Dancing and singing is top tier, and the fact the song does contain a twist, as the dance move, and a literal twist, as we see Harbinger is still around even with Maestro gone, are cleverly interwoven. So yeah, it's great, and I'm pretty sure we see Murray Gold doing the instrumental for a bit, and it's fun when the Beatles and Cilla Black get into it, but I just wasn't as into it as I wanted to be, which just sucks for me. But I hope the other watchers got everything you could out of it. I think maybe it would have been better if it somehow interwove into the plot, like they needed to do this big musical number to get music back on track. Or perhaps this musical number could have been what defeated the Maestro. Good music versus bad music, something along those lines. The episode ends pretty funnily as they dance across the Abbey Road crossing like it's a piano, and I guess this whole thing is the equivalent of the Toymaker's powers being left over for a while. But the episode properly ends as the TARDIS doors play the last notes as the Doctor and Ruby leave. So, that was the Devil's Chord. And while once again there are problems, I love the episode much more than Space Babies. The musical aspect was used well, and while 2 of the 4 Beatles were shafted, it was nice to have them here, not only as window dressing, but technically the ones to defeat Maestro. And Maestro themselves, while not fantastic all the time, gives us a great time. The performance is mostly great, only with small gripes, and the power of the character is sold well. The connection to the Toymaker really adding here, and not feeling contrived, as one of my favourite villain tropes of Doctor Who is unknowable deity. The Doctor and Ruby were just as good in this story, but the Doctor gets more emotional range, higher highs and lower lows. And this time the story supported these performances, instead of confusing itself. So overall, it delivered on great concepts, the writing and acting came together better than last time, and the musical aspect and connection to the arc were integrated well. So I'll rate it as the best of the 2 episodes, but not quite as high as The Church on Ruby Road, at a 7.5 out of 10. Thank you everybody so much for watching my review of the first 2 episodes of the new season of Doctor Who. And hopefully we'll be able to keep up with the weekly reviews as the episodes come out. Please like the video if you liked it, comment down below if you wish, or if there's something you want me to check out once Doctor Who finishes airing for the season. And consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, ring that notification bell so that you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.